Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Y'all are a good example of what could be if we all wanted to work together. I think you do a good job. Thank you for all the things you did for the Port of Charleston. MOX, we're going to have a hearing in Armed Services. Probably the best decision you made is to get it out of here. If you're looking for a good time, come listen to that hearing. I'm going to weigh into these guys like Sherman going through Georgia, which is probably a bad analogy. And let me tell you why. The administration wants to cancel the MOX program. Say it costs too much. May be right. So we told them in December, try to rebaseline it and see if you can make it cheaper. Well, they said they'd talked to the contractor 2 weeks ago, but it wasn't about rebaselining. So if you think you're going to get away with that, you're not. And if you think you're going to cancel the MOX program and not have a viable path forward, then you're going to be in for a rude awakening, unless the Congress wants to abandon the agreement with the Russians. Maybe that's what we want to do. The most historic non-proliferation agreement, maybe in modern times, was achieved in 2000, that period of time where we would take 34 metric tons of weapons-grade plutonium, turn it into commercial-grade fuel. The Russians would do the same, burn it up in a reactor. It could never be used for weapons again. And you're talking about thousands of warheads that can never be used, swords to plowshares. So we signed an agreement in 2010 to use MOX as the disposition path for the United States. Now in 2016, we suddenly realized it's like 300% more than we thought it would be. So when I asked the Secretary of Energy in 2010, what was the baseline estimate, life cycle cost of the MOX program, he says, well, we didn't do it that way then. And when I asked him about, well, okay, you're going to change course and you're going to bury it in the ground, how do people in New Mexico feel about that? Well, I talked to the two senators in New Mexico. They didn't feel too excited about that right now. You're going to change the disposition path. How do the Russians feel about that? Well, they sat right there in front of me and said, we've been consulting with them. We had great conversations. Well, I don't read the Kremlin website, but I probably should, because we found on the Kremlin website that the reason Putin didn't come to the nuclear summit is because America, in his view, has broken the agreement by changing disposition paths without consulting the Russians, and they don't like the idea of burying it rather than turning it into commercial-grade fuel through the MOX program, and they don't agree to that. Maybe they will. Other than these few details, everything is on track. So you need to come to this hearing. $345 million won't build the MOX program. $270 won't. Senator Feinstein said the thing I agree with the most. We need a plan that will work. And this is not a South Carolina problem. This is a national problem and an international problem. If you can convince me there's a way to do this cheaper, I'm all ears, but don't give me a plan that no one's thought about, that's ill-conceived, and has no snowball's chance in hell of working, just because the costs are larger than we anticipated. We better get this right. As a nation, we better get this right. So I want to thank the committee for rejecting the idea of terminating the program. I think you were wise enough to know that there's a lot to be done before you terminate this program. And if you're going to replace it with what? And does it actually work, and will it be cheaper? Well, cheaper depends on what the Russians agree to do. Cheaper in terms of what Putin's willing to do. I want to know what Putin's willing to do before I make that decision. To my friends in New Mexico, I'm going to stick with you to make sure you're not dumped on until we find out what works and what doesn't. To the people of South Carolina, we've been good stewards of the taxpayer money at the Department of Energy. You've stepped up and done things that other people didn't want to do. You're not going to get left holding the bag. This committee has made a wise decision to look at the MOX program anew and not terminate it until you understand, can it be re-engineered to be cheaper and more affordable? Can it be replaced? And what's the consequence of banning this agreement? Both of y'all deserve a pat on the back as far as I'm concerned of making a very wise decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Graham. And some of the senators weren't here when I spoke earlier. What Senator Feinstein and I recommended was recognizing that the authorizing committee for the MOX project is the Armed Services Committee, that it really wasn't the province of this committee to decide whether to authorize the project or to change its mission, that that needed to be done in the Armed Services Committee. So that was the reason for our meeting this morning, and I'm grateful to the new senators, the New Mexico senators, to Senators Graham and Secretary Moniz and Senator Scott, and others who attended to that. So that ball is now in the Armed Forces Committee court for a while, although it'll be back to us, we hope, with whatever instructions we should have. At least we're responsibly confronting a very difficult problem with a huge cost number on one hand and some pretty big problems to solve on the other, South Carolina, New Mexico, and Russia. So we're working together. we realize that we're...
Now I'm on New Mexico's side, not the Russian
I
side.
know.
Okay.
I know, but we're all the senators the senators who are going to eventually have to deal with this issue, we're meeting and we're confronting our responsibility, and I thank Lindsey for being there and for his attitude on it.